Our job begins where most advisors stop. Saving money is great, but how do you spend it without risk in retirement? Welcome to Every Day is Saturday with Brad Gotto and Matt Stahl, partners and private wealth managers at Fiat Wealth Management. In this podcast, we aim to broaden your knowledge about the financial world we live in today and make the boring and complex financial decisions fun, informative, and educational. Join us on this journey where Brad and Matt will explore different strategies on how to spend your money without guilt and have peace of mind knowing you are spending it the optimal way in retirement.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Every Day is Saturday. My name is Matt Stahl. I'm a partner at Fiat Wealth Management, and I'm here with my fellow partner, Brad Gotto. We're excited to dive in today. We have some exciting topics to discover. Before we get into that, Brad, what have you been up to?
Oh man, it's that time of year, Matt. We just were talking about this offline. It's fall, and with fall you get the nice, cool, crisp mornings, and so also with fall you get football. So that's what I've been up to. I got two boys, as a lot of our listeners probably know, but for those of you who don't, I got an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they're both in football. One's flag, one's got pads on, and so we're football practice, football games. We actually have a little bit of fall baseball going on. So I'm busy being a dad and trying to figure out how to put my lawn to bed. If that makes sense to any of the listeners.
I get it.
Yeah. I just
fellow suburban dad. I know exactly what you're talking
neighbor
about.
wars, man. We moved into this house last fall, and so this is kind of our first full summer in this house, and I'm trying to figure out how to put my yard to sleep. How about you?
Well, for fun, I go for a long run, a trail run every year with a group of people in the middle of the night through the woods. And I just did that recently. That's kind of how I commemorate fall each year. It is
it's a good thing that you told the listeners that that's for fun, because it sounds like community service to some, I'm sure.
It's a different kind of fun, but hey, I love it. It's a unique experience, and it rained on me this year. So that was a first time experience for me to add rain to the mix, but I had a great time, and
so it's the middle of the night.
Begun.
You're on a trail, and it's raining, and you're running,
and it's dark because you're running through the middle of the night. So it was it's a once in a lifetime experience that I try to have every year.
I was gonna say, except that you do it every year.
That's right. And we this is also football time for us at our home, but it's the European brand of football. We have 4 now soccer fanatics in our house. I do still like watching American football, and Brad and I have had a lot to cheer about this year. Good year for
both being Iowa Hawkeye fans. Let's go. The European brand of football. Matt, you and I go back and forth about this. I know all your boys play football or European football, soccer, and you're really into it. Not my sport. Although I will say Ted Lasso, if anything's going to get me pulled into soccer, it's Ted Lasso. What a great show.
All right, well, let's dive in. Today, if you were to ask us what we do we actually just had this conversation this morning with our advisors, and we posed the question to say, if you were to describe what we do in 10 words or less, what would that be? Brad, what was the answer?
We teach our clients how to spend their money.
Absolutely. So unfortunately,
or even shorter, Matt, or we teach them how to party.
Yes.
Spend your money, party. It's synonymous, right?
Which we like that even better. Sometimes we have to explain what the party part means. But so we teach people how to spend their money, and it sounds like all fun and games, but there's some risks that are associated with that, aren't there?
Just a couple.
Yeah.
A couple.
We're gonna dive into some of those risks and address those and go through and explain how we address those internally. And today we're gonna start with something called sequence of returns risk.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, that probably doesn't mean a lot to other people, but to us internally, it's one of the biggest risks that the folks that we run into face. Majority of the people we talk to are in that 55 to 70 range, and they're transitioning to a different period in their life where they've put the responsibility upon us to really develop a paycheck for them, to create that paycheck for them because they're stepping out of their job. So where we're going to start is when we're creating that paycheck. So Brad, will you just walk us through, because you're the one that's more involved in that side of the process. What do we look at there? What are the steps we're looking at in creating that paycheck?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right, Matt, where your normal paychecks from your job. And now instead of having a paycheck and just kind of getting paid as you go, you have a pile of money and you have to find a way to take that pile of money and turn it into this paycheck. Obviously, the first place we have to start, Matt, is figuring out what they need their paycheck to be. For some of our clients in retirement, they live very simple retirements, and that's not good or bad, but it could be $3,000-4,000 a month. I've seen that people are living on and very happily in retirement, all the way up to over $20,000 a month that they want / need to maintain lifestyle. And so we have to first obviously define what size or amount of paycheck are you looking for. The next kind of breakdown, step 2, if you will, is to figure out what paychecks do you already have coming in. I know you're retired, and so that maybe confuses some people. But what I mean by that, retirement paychecks would be things like pensions and Social Security, or maybe people have already purchased individual annuity contracts, income annuities, things like that. So the bottom line is everybody gets to participate in Social Security if you've got a working history. And so everybody's got some sort of kind of baseline income coming in the door. We call that stable income or guaranteed income. And so we got to figure out what is already going to be coming in the door, and then just figure out how we're going to solve for that gap, right? So if the person wants $10,000 a month, and between Social Security's pensions and other guaranteed sources, maybe they have $5,000 a month. Well, they have a $5,000 income gap that we need to pick up, or a shortfall with their assets, the pile of money that they've saved. And so that's kind of step 2, is to figure out how much of the income is coming in from guaranteed sources. And then step 3, Matt, is of course to solve that problem. Where do we come up with that difference, and how do we start to pull that money out of the accounts, or their portfolio, as some people like to call it, to get them to that paycheck that they need?
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to take a stab at just what the heck sequence of returns. What are we talking about here? And I'm going to let you chime in and correct me or add anything to that. That sound good?
It does. And I think to give the listener some context, what we're talking, the sequence of returns is really, Matt, comes into play in this third step of this process we just got done defining, right?
Yep.
Now we're at the point where we're through all of your guaranteed income sources. They're picking up whatever part of your paycheck that they are. That third piece, using your portfolio to kind of bridge that gap between what you need and what you have, is where the sequencing comes in, and this risk, quote unquote, comes in. So with that being said, take a stab at it.
All right, perfect. Before we do that, I'm going to take one big step back, and you're going to find, listeners are going to find the fault in how we're going to approach this and describe exactly what the risks we pose are. We're going to start with a 60-40 portfolio. And what I mean by that is, just to keep things really simple, we're going to say we have a portfolio that's 60% large US companies and 40% intermediate government bonds. That means that they don't have long terms or short terms, they're just in the middle. So to keep things really simple, if we go back to the 1920s, if we just held that portfolio over that time frame from the 1920s up till today, we would have averaged nearly 8% rate of return over that time frame. So why the heck is this so complicated, right? So if it's 8% and that's what I'm going to get every year, then why would I not be able to take 6% out of that?
Well, if you're getting 8 and you're only taking 6, it stands to reason your money should be growing.
But what do you and I know that is a huge fault in that statement? We know
timing.
We know that 8% is just an average over that time frame, right? So if we dig a little deeper into this, even with a conservative portfolio, we may be up 16% one year and down 8% the next year, and so on over time. As long as we averaged 8% over that time frame, we can speak in generalizations. But what you and I both know, as we dig into that further, that as we're pulling money out, it's like a double whammy, right? So if I'm drawing down $3,000 from a particular account and we have a prolonged market depression there, then that's going to affect how long our money is going to last. I think it makes sense to, Brad and I were just talking about this recently. So an event that we can all relate to is March of 2020. And, that's something that's recent. I imagine we can all look back and think about where we were in 2009, the early 2000s. But March of 2020 is something that is fresh in all of our minds. And that's, when we first had the new strike of the pandemic. So from the standpoint of everything else, we're just going to focus on the financial side of that today. But we all experienced a very, very quick correction, that affected the nest eggs of most of the people that we talked to. So when we look at that, and I put myself in the shoes of someone who's deciding to retire today, and if I'm looking at my nest egg and that's $1 million, and I suddenly see that take a hit of 30%, my confidence level is probably going to be a little bit affected. Does that sound right?
Yeah. It's interesting, Matt. Just I was thinking as you were talking, you and I, and you mentioned 0809 was kind of the last real recession that we've had. 16-month pullback in the S&P from October of 07 till March of 09. S&P down over 50%, 53% to be exact. You and I were both pretty young financial advisors at that time. You started in this industry in 05. I started in 06. And so come 2007, obviously short careers for both of us at that point, but all we had ever done is quote unquote manage money or work with our clients in up markets. And then all of a sudden, not only did it go down, but it went down for a very long time. And over that 16-month period, 53%, that was rough. It was just interesting. And this was so much different, right? Because it wasn't 16 months. 53% is a really, really big number. And I don't take anything away from that. But 30% in a month, more than 30% in a month, while you're stuck at home and people are not just worried about their portfolios and what's going on in their savings, but they're worried about their health too. It was just it was crazy. It was a crazy time.
So we know that this is a risk that we face, right? If we're deciding to transition from a position where my employer is paying me a steady paycheck, I've saved up this pile of money, I'm deciding to create a paycheck off of that. So we know that that's a risk dependent upon what the financial markets do and how that's going to affect our pile of money over time. Correct? Let's transition to how do we address that? So we know that it's an issue. We know that depending on the time when we retire, that could affect things. If I decided to retire the day that we saw the financial markets down 50%, it's obviously going to look different if it's at the peak. Let's transition to how do we address that? And what kind of steps can we take? So let's think about creating that paycheck. What are some specific things that we do internally to address that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that can be done. When we go back, Matt, to this conversation of helping people figure out, okay, over your retirement, however long this is going to be, potentially. When you think about it, on average these days, Matt, people are retiring in the early mid 60s, sometimes not till 70, sometimes before that. But let's just say, for our example, today, 65. Okay. And we're going to plan out to a married couple, 65-year-old married couple's life expectancy, which would be almost to the mid 90s. So for all intents and purposes, 30 years. So whatever this pile of money is that you have, you kind of think of in like a 30-year time frame, maybe longer, maybe shorter, obviously, but you have a 30-year time frame that we have to spend this down. And you think about this idea of where are the markets at? What do current market conditions and market conditions in the near future have to do with my paycheck? Like I said, the first thing we got to figure out is what is the guaranteed portion? So if we look at the life of your retirement and reverse engineer that into things like Social Security and pensions, what we can come up with is a percentage and say, okay, 30% of your paychecks over your entire retirement are going to be picked up by these guaranteed sources, or 40% or 50%. And what that tells us is a lot, Matt. It tells us really how much of your income is going to be, what I like to use the example of how much of your income is going to be salaried versus how much of your income in retirement is going to be performance-based, anything that's non-Social Security, non-pension, that sort of thing. And as you might expect, Matt, if you're in a job and you're still working and the vast majority of your income is performance-based and not salaried, that's going to affect how you set up your month-to-month budget, right? If you're not paid like super consistently every month and you're not salaried, then you're going to have to build your lifestyle around that. Or even if you are salaried, there's a lot of people that we work with, Matt, and that they're salaried and the vast majority of their income comes through that salary, but then they get an annual bonus, right? But then people kind of bake that into their plans and say, well, every March I get a bonus of 10% or 20% of what I make or what have you. And they kind of bank on that. Some people, even in this example, Matt, do that with their tax returns. They overpay the government all year long and they just wait until they get their big check back from the government. And that's kind of their savings. But in retirement, you got to think of it that way of how much of my income is salaried. What's coming from Social Security pensions and income annuities to kind of build that foundation to my income. And if that number is on the lower end, 20, 30, 40%, anything less than 50, obviously the majority of your paycheck is going to be determined by the success or failure of your portfolio over time. And so when it comes to that, how we follow the sequencing problem is going to be determined by how much of your paycheck and how much stress is going to be put on your portfolio by how much needs to be picked up out of your paycheck. The rule of thumb in our industry, Matt, has been forever that you can safely pull 4% out of your portfolio. So for that person that has that $1 million portfolio, they say safely, you should be able to pull 40 grand a year. And so that's kind of a good jumping off point for people to think about when it comes to how can I start to begin to think about spending down my portfolio? What's an okay starting place, I guess, for me to determine if I can afford to retire or supplement my Social Security and pension to get me to the paycheck that I want. So the first thing in figuring this problem out is figuring out roughly what percentage of your portfolio do we have to pull out every year to get you to the income paycheck that you want.
So what if let's fast forward 22 years and Katie and I, my wife, come to you and we say that we want to spend.
It's a very specific amount of time, Matt. You just are you telling me you're out, 62. You're selling out, you're
62 years old.
I didn't know that. I didn't know you were going to retire at 62. I just learned something new here.
So we decide we're going to retire. Say we want to spend $75,000 a year. And as going through all of our numbers, we realize that we're going to, between Social Security and an old pension that Katie has, we're going to have, $35,000 coming in that we would consider a reliable income source. And so you're telling me that's the first starting point. We look at that and you say to me, hey, less than 50% of your income is guaranteed. Are you okay with watching the newspapers and CNN for the rest of these years and worrying about what's going on? Is that accurate?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, obviously, depending on what your portfolio looks like and how it's structured is going to have more or less exposure to what you said, the newspapers, who's in office, what Congress is doing, all that kind of stuff for sure. But absolutely, that's the first thing that people need to be comfortable with. And there isn't a right or wrong answer here, Matt. As an example, everybody's comfort level with risk in the market is different. We use a scale internally here at Fiat of 1 to 99 to measure risk. A risk of 1 is like your checking account or the mattress. Risk of 99 is the highest, obviously. Risk with your hair on fire, we joke about all the time. And we've had clients come in here, take the assessment, and I've seen as low as like a 10, which basically means that person's level of comfort is just like maybe an online savings account past the checking account. I've seen people up in the 80s, which means they're willing to take more risk than the S&P 500 index. So they would have, if they were actually taking that much risk and I gave the example earlier. So we use that example of October 07 to March of 09, S&P is down 53%. They should have probably lost more than that. And so we see it all over the board of what people are comfortable with. But one of the biggest problems for people when they create these paychecks, Matt, is what they do and what they're comfortable with aren't anywhere near each other. In other words, maybe they take an assessment and we realize on a scale of 1 to 99, they're comfortable with a risk of like a 40, which my industry would probably normally define as moderately conservative or moderate or something like that. And their portfolio is not invested at a 40, it's invested at a 70. And so that would be one of the first kind of big cracks in the foundation. Because ultimately what's going to happen is in March of last year, when the market tanked 30% in 30 days, they were the people panicking. And it's that panic that causes them to not stick to the plan. And so when you look at all the history of this 4% safe withdrawal rate, and they show you all the statistics of, hey, this works the majority of the time if you just kind of stay the course. Part of that is staying the course. And that's honestly, Matt, probably the thing that throws people off the most and what derails their retirement income plans is they don't stay the course. They don't stay in the game, right? They build a 60-40 portfolio like you talked about before, 80-20 or whatever they build, but then ultimately they end up changing it because they get uncomfortable. And a lot of that has to do with what you just talked about. A lot of people have the majority of their income needs being satisfied by non-guaranteed sources or something that has embedded risk. And it just compounds this issue of running out of money or spending without stress.
Got it. Okay. So what if I come to you and say, I'm not comfortable with the fact that 50% of my income is subject to all sorts of other crazy conditions going on. I want to be able to wake up every Monday and not worry about what the heck is going on. Every Saturday. Nice correction.
Every Saturday, Matt. Come on.
So I want to wake up every Saturday and not worry about what the heck's going on. So now what do I do?
There's multiple things that you can do, right? And so looking at what we internally, Matt, we call it an income stability ratio. So this guaranteed part of your paycheck and defining how much of your paycheck is guaranteed versus not guaranteed. We call it an income stability ratio. It tells us, throughout your entire retirement, what percentage of your paycheck's being picked up by these, pensions and Social Security that we just got done discussing. One of the first steps we need to take is build what we call now, soon, and later buckets of money. Money, Matt, is money that we know that you need to spend, you and Katie need to spend in the next probably 12 to 24 months. And that's going to be essentially, Matt, cash and cash equivalents, because we don't know when the market's going to drop 30% in 30 days. And the last thing I want to do is give you a monthly paycheck that's subject to that kind of volatility, right? Because in the sequencing that we keep talking about, sequence of returns, I think the best visual I can give our listeners is, imagine you go to the Kentucky, they call it the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, right? These horses come flying out of these gates, they race around the track. It's 1.25 miles, I believe. And it all happens in about 2 minutes. That said, you could be the horse with the best odds to win, the odds-on favorite, all the things. Everybody's putting their money on you. And you could be the fastest horse in the race. But if you trip coming out of that gate, that race is so crazy that you just aren't going to have time to make it up. And you're not going to win the race. Usually what ends up happening is the horse that kind of gets the best jump is the one that tends to stay out front. And it's different racing from the front than it is racing from behind. So you could really kill that analogy off and go deep with it. But the bottom line is you don't want to stumble coming out of the gates. And how do you avoid that? Well, you build some now money. You have cash and cash equivalent type options, non-risk options to build that. Soon money is kind of the part of the portfolio we want to build to be spent after the now money. Years 3 through 8, 3 through 10, kind of in that range. We need to do something more than cash because we need the money to grow. Right, Matt? Because inflation's a real thing. This happens, right? If you don't believe me, just go buy a gallon of gas or go buy a gallon of milk, or, we just stocked up. We're both from Iowa. I've got family down there that are farmers. They raise cattle. So we just stocked up on some meat, which I was really, really excited by because a pound of ground beef at the market these days is about $5. So inflation's a real thing. And so we have to do better than cash, right? We can't just sit in cash with everything because some of it has to grow. And so we need to do it smartly. We can't just ride the entire roller coaster of the markets if we only have kind of 3 to 8 years to let things bake. But then we have these later monies, and those can just go to the markets, because anything we don't need for 10 years or more, if you retire at 62, Matt, you and Katie do need money after the age of 72. At least we need to plan for that possibility. And so that money can be in the market. And so building these buckets of now, soon, and later money is really, really important. The other thing, and kind of the other strategy you can look at is, how do I supplement my foundational income? How do I add more Social Security to my life or more pensions to my life? Or what if I don't have a pension and the only thing I have is Social Security? And I don't like the fact that to your point that you made earlier, Matt, more than 50% of my income is subject to the volatility of the markets or kind of what's going on in the economy around me. Other than cash and other non-risk assets like certificates of deposit, the bank, CDs, government bonds, things like that, the insurance companies allow you to build your own pensions. You can basically build income annuities with them that allow you to turn a portion of your retirement monies into this guaranteed paycheck mimicking something similar to Social Security or to a pension. And this is not a recommendation to people to go out and purchase annuities. That doesn't mean that they're good, doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that if you're the person that wants the majority of your income to be guaranteed, that you can't outlive it, doesn't matter what the markets are doing, that sort of stuff, that is the way to get that done, right, wrong, or indifferent. And it all goes back to what I said before, Matt. If you're lower on that risk scale and you want to wake up on Saturday morning and know that your income's just going to come in the door every month, no matter what, we call it mailbox money. You just want mailbox money. That's the way to get that done.
That now, sooner or later, that just makes me feel good. I feel much more peace of mind.
Well, it all comes down to this idea that you have to point your money in the right direction of what you want with it. And the crazy part is when you look at your pile of money as your retirement accounts, right? And you look at, what you've saved, you're like, this is my retirement money. That's awesome. And it's good that we've at least defined it as that. But then the next step in that process is, okay, well, what are we going to spend here over the next year? What about in year 2, year 3? And if you start to segment it out that way and go, this is the pile of money I'm going to spend 3 years into my retirement, it gives you a lot more finer detail to be able to tell that money what to do for you and what's important. If it's money, Matt, that you and Katie, if you retire at 62 and you and Katie, we look at part of the monies for your ages 72 and beyond, as an example. Is short-term volatility really that big of a problem for that money? No. Is limited liquidity of that money really that big of a problem? No, because I don't need it for 10 years. But if that's the money that we've defined as the stuff you're going to spend over the next 12 months, well, both of those things are a really, really big issue. And what's interesting, Matt, is you can't get everything you want with every dollar that you have. In an ideal world, there's only really 3 things we all want with all of our money. We want return, we want safety, right? And we want it to be liquid. Let me add it anytime I want it. If I could get all 3 of those things with every dollar that I have, we'd be in an awesome spot. The problem is there's no place to put your money that does all 3 of those things. You get 2 of the 3, you can have return and safety, but you're going to give up liquidity. Or you can have liquidity and safety, but you're going to give up return. But if we can drill down into what monies we need now, what we need soon, and what we need later, we can pick the 2 of those 3 things with those different piles that make the most sense depending on what we're after.
I think you can tie a bow on that. I love it. We alluded to, but that's not the only risk. And we alluded to a couple of those today. I think we're going to break those into the next few episodes. That sound like a plan?
It does. And Matt, we keep talking about this every day of Saturday lifestyle, right? And in a retirement, you want to retire and do the things you wanted to do. The whole point of, a lot of what we wanted to kind of build this podcast for and around was this idea of let us help you actually just have fun and stop worrying about, who's going to get elected in the next election cycles or what inflation is going to look like over the next handful of years or all these things. And so we bring up these risks, but only for the fact of like giving you solutions so that you can do exactly what you said, wake up on a Saturday morning and feel really awesome about it.
Well, stay tuned for the next 2 risks we're going to talk about. That was not a scare tactic. We'll provide solutions.
We'll come at you. We have 2 other ones. We want to I guess, Matt, we could market this as the 3 big risks of retirement. We talked about 1 today. We got 2 more coming at you in the next couple of episodes. So stay tuned for those. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for listening to Every Day is Saturday. If you want to reach out to us here at Fiat, our website, it's going to give you all of the information that you need. And you can find that at www.fiatwm.com. Please subscribe to the podcast if you have not done so already so that you do not miss an episode, because obviously we've got the other 2 big risks coming up. You don't want to miss those. And we would absolutely love it if you would share this podcast with your friends and your loved ones. As always, listeners, I'm Brad Gotto here with my partner, Matt Stahl, and we will see all of you next Saturday.
But Brad, we don't record the podcast on Saturday.
One of these days, Matt, you're going to get it. Every day is Saturday.
Aha.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management or Foundation's investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Investment advisory services offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.